Hi, for libertyandeconomics.com and the Liberty and Economics Review, I'm Nick Sorrentino. Um, Today I want to talk about the Federal Reserve and natural systems. I recently have had the pleasure of corresponding with someone who does a great deal of thinking about how economic systems are similar to systems in nature. I do a fair amount of thinking about this as well. And I wrote a piece about a year ago about how the Federal Reserve is similar in some ways to the U.S. Park Service. So hang with me here. You know, for years and years, every summer it seems that there are these huge raging fires out west in the national parklands. I mean, just acres and acres, hundreds of acres consumed, thousands of acres each summer. For a long time, people were making the case that this is an example of global warming. There wasn't enough rain the summer before, or excuse me, the winter before, or not enough snow melt, and so on. But really, what most people have come to understand is that what has happened is that in these national forests, there has been a policy of putting out every little fire that comes up in the forest. So if a natural wildfire breaks out, the Park Service quickly runs over, puts it out. Well, 75 years of this have essentially filled our forests with lots of dead timber. The trees are much more full than they were 75 years ago. And so when a fire does happen, and it inevitably does, it burns a lot harder, a lot hotter, a lot longer, and over a broader area than it would have, had it just been a lightning strike, um, in a forest that was periodically cleared out by a fire every 10 years naturally. So there's 75 years of built up dead wood in these forests, and it's just tinder just waiting to ignite. Well, Federal Reserve is similar to the Park Service in that its expressed um, reason for existence is to mitigate the ebbs and flows of the economy. Now, obviously, they failed terribly in this regard, but let's think about the most recent actions by the Fed during the most recent financial crisis. Essentially, what they did is they buoyed um, companies that were not performing: AIG, GM, Chrysler, um, number of other banks. Uh, the list goes on and on. Freddie and Fannie, um, and essentially what they did is they put out, over the years they had put out fires, rescuing these, essentially lowering interest rates whenever there was a little, there's some smoke in the forest, um, and giving, you know, special deals to certain businesses to keep them afloat. Well, in so doing, what they did is they built up a lot of economic tinder. Um, there were a lot of companies out there that essentially were not run efficiently, were poorly managed, but they were kept alive because the Federal Reserve ran in and put out every little fire every time there was a recession. Well, what happens? Um, you have sooner or later you're going to have multiple lightning strikes in the forest, and the situation is just going to be such that the Park Service can't put out the fire, or in this case, the Federal Reserve can't put out the fire. And what happens is the fire then burns hotter over a broader area than it ever would have before because there's all this economic tinder in the economy. GM was full of dead wood, and the ramifications of um, all this fuel in the economy was it just spread out and made things that much worse. Well, the Federal Reserve, in its wisdom during the most recent crisis, said, "Okay, well, you know what? We may have an absolute raging inferno on our hands, but you know what? We're gonna, gosh darn it, we're gonna put this fire out too." So what they did is they essentially poured money into the system, um, gave the banks about $23 trillion um, in an effort to stave off. It was already a catastrophe, but basically stave off economic Armageddon. Well, the thing was, had they let it burn, had they let this fire burn at the time, it would have cleared out a lot of unuseful economic tinder. Um, in the short term, it would have been very painful. The fire would have burned very hot, and it would have been a big fire. But eventually, it would have burned out, and we would be better off for it. The forest would have been cleared, the economic forest would have been cleared, and new shoots of life could come up. But now what has happened is, even though this was a huge fire, the Federal Reserve has put this. Well, I mean, it hasn't really put it out, but it has suppressed this economic fire, the economic crisis, with gobs and gobs and gobs of fiat money. The thing that is concerning is they're just staving off a disaster on a much bigger scale than even the one that they have curtailed for this moment. Um, when I mean when an economic wildfire breaks out again, um, it may just take the whole forest with it, uh, because and even the Federal Reserve will be powerless in the face of this raging fire, and it will be god awful. Now, when will it happen? Who knows? It could be a good long time. Um, but if we continue to allow the Federal Reserve to essentially prop up economies or prop up companies, which can be thought of in terms of trees, these dying trees, okay, these big dying trees with all this fuel. If we continue to allow them to do this and to not let the economic system work as it should, just like a forest should, with periodic natural fires, maybe every 10 years or so, that clear out, the underbrush and allow new life to grow. If we don't let that happen again, we're going to be witness to a calamity unlike anything humans may have ever seen, economically speaking. So, anyway, hopefully we can come to our senses between now and then. We'll see. Till next time.